Joining me now is the Secretary of Treasury, Janet Yellen. Secretary Yellen, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thanks so much, Chuck. It's a pleasure to be with you.
All right, I want to start with today's May 20th. 12 days is June 1st. How hard is 12 days? President Biden seemed to hint earlier this morning that he thought we're 2 to 3 weeks away. And, 12 days, 2 weeks, we could argue there. But how hard is this June 1st deadline?
Well, I indicated in my last letter to Congress that we expect to be unable to pay all of our bills in early June and possibly as soon as June 1st. And I will continue to update Congress, but I certainly haven't changed my assessment. So I think that that's a hard deadline.
When is the next round of tax receipts that you are able to calculate, know what you have going forward? I know there's some quarterly payments that come in. Obviously, the refunds have been going out the door as well. But when do you get that number to know whether you can get through the month of June and July?
Well, on June 15th, there are tax payments that are made that are substantial. But early June, I interpret as before that, and it would be very difficult to get to that date.
We use the phrase extraordinary measures to talk about what you do to pay bills in this period of time. Can you give an example of one of the measures you plan to take in the first week of June? Because, yeah, I hear the phrase, but it isn't ever quite articulated very well for the public to consume.
Well, we have been using these extraordinary measures for several months now to be able to pay all of our bills without exceeding the debt ceiling, which is about $31 trillion. And what these involve are taking some funds that are invested in non-marketable government security. An example would be the Civil Service Retirement Fund, and first taking inflows that would normally be invested in non-marketable securities and leaving it in cash, because those securities we would typically issue would count toward the debt ceiling. By leaving it in cash, we conserve room under the debt ceiling to issue debt to the markets.
I want to point out something that a lot of House conservatives just simply don't believe what Treasury is doing. I'm going to read you one quote here. Some conservative Republicans have said for months that they felt Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen had exaggerated the risk of a default in June in a bid to put pressure on the House Republican majority. She's going to play it out now, saying it's a crisis. The day is here, said Rep. Ralph Norman, a member of the Freedom Caucus. What do you think you could do to convince Congressman Norman that this early June deadline is real?
Well, Treasury has a long history of informing Congress about how much cash and headroom we have under the debt ceiling, and we take pride in the credibility of the forecasts that we make. I would point out that the Congressional Budget Office has recently indicated that they expect that early June will be a problem. And forecasters on Wall Street who look at information daily on our cash balances and resources agree. So there will be hard choices to make if the debt ceiling isn't raised. And, I would simply say since 1789, the United States has a history of paying its bills on time. That's what the world wants to see, a continued commitment to do that. It's what underlies U.S. Treasury securities as the safest investment on the planet. And it's not an acceptable situation for us to be unable to pay our bills.
I just want to sort of understand the go or no go to June 15th in this way. It's clear that June 1st is not hard, but it's the beginning of that period. What is the likelihood we can get to the June 15th tax receipts to avoid breaching the debt ceiling? Can you put a percentage on it? Is it 20%, 40%, something like that?
Well, there's always uncertainty about tax receipts and spending. And so it's hard to be absolutely certain about this, but my assessment is that the odds of reaching June 15th while being able to pay all of our bills is quite low.
Fair enough. Let me ask you about what are the sticking points here. It does appear as if we heard President Biden bring up revenue, meaning taxes, maybe it's closing loopholes, or maybe it's actually raising a percentage here or there. Is it a hard and fast line? Is the White House going to accept a deal on this to raise the debt ceiling that includes spending caps but does not include any increased revenues or taxes?
Well, look, you know, the White House is negotiating in good faith with the Republicans to try to find a bipartisan solution. I don't want to negotiate in public and put down any red lines, but certainly the president has pointed out, and it's important for the American people to understand, we're all concerned about deficits and fiscal responsibility, but deficits can be addressed both through changes in spending and also through changes in revenue. And the Republicans have taken that off the table. Something that greatly concerns me is that they have even been in favor of removing funding that's been provided to the Internal Revenue Service to crack down on tax fraud. We have an enormous gap between the taxes we're collecting and what we should be collecting if everyone paid the taxes that they really owe. And that's really a reflection of tax fraud. It amounts to an estimated $7 trillion over the next decade. So equipping the IRS with the funding they need to audit high-income individuals and corporations, that's something that doesn't cost money. It nets money substantially for the federal government. So, and you know, of course, there are revenue proposals that we think make the tax code fairer. Let's
end with a phrase that I talked to you about at the beginning, and that is this idea of extraordinary measures. Is the 14th Amendment fall into the category of extraordinary measures?
Well, extraordinary measures is used in a different way, but there has been much discussion of the 14th Amendment. And as President Biden said, I believe this morning, it doesn't seem like something that could be appropriately used in these circumstances, given the legal uncertainty around it and given the tight time frame we're on. So my devout hope is that Congress will raise the debt ceiling.
But are you just going to
pay all of our bills?
If it doesn't happen, okay, and we're at this point, are you just going to sit there and pick and choose? Or why not go and pay and then, you know, it's one of those, are you going to pay all of our debts and essentially let the courts tell us you shouldn't have? I mean, if we breach this debt ceiling, I understand not wanting to use it now, but are we really going to sit there and just let some bills go unpaid, not even trying this?
Well, we take the debt ceiling seriously as a constraint on our ability to pay bills that are coming due. And my assumption is that if the debt ceiling isn't raised, there will be hard choices to make about what bills go unpaid. And
so there will be bills on what you're saying is if the debt ceiling is not raised, that there's going to be a default on President Biden's watch, even though he doesn't want it, that you're not going to try any other measures. You'll allow a default on some debt if Congress doesn't raise this debt ceiling. Well,
there will be some bill we have to pay interest and principal on outstanding debt. We also have obligations to seniors who count on Social Security, our military that expects pay, contractors who've provided services to the federal government, and some bills have to go unpaid.
So there will be some bills unpaid if the debt ceiling is not raised.
Yes, and many people,
Have you
including
decided
many
which
credit
bills?
Rating agencies.
Have you decided which bills those are going to be yet?
I would say we're focused on raising the debt ceiling, and there will be hard choices if that doesn't occur. There can be no acceptable outcomes if the debt ceiling isn't raised, regardless of what decisions we make.
Secretary Yellen, Treasury Secretary for President Biden, appreciate you coming on and sharing the administration's perspective. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.